Good morning, sorry, and a very warm welcome to our session where we'll be looking at how digital twins can help to build back better post-COVID. I'm Dr. Sarah Graham from IES, whom some of you will know, and I'm delighted to welcome Anne Johnson, founder of the Fair Futures Partnership. Anne is an experienced environmental and sustainability consultant. She established the Fair Futures Partnership in July 2020, having previously been Head of Environment, Energy and Sustainability at Hollis. Anne has expertise across a broad range of sectors and specialises in the provision of advice on ESG and net zero carbon strategies. Anne is a fellow of the RSA, sits on the governance board of the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre and is a member of the Investment Property Forum Scottish Board. Between us, we'll talk for around 45 minutes with time for Q&A at the end. I am going to switch the camera off as I proceed through the slides now. Okay. So what, why and how? We have an opportunity to do things better coming out of the pandemic. So this frames the question of what is it that we need to do? In the course of the next 45 minutes, we'll look at the why, exploring some recent drivers towards creating a healthy, sustainable, green and equitable built environment. Our mission at IES is to focus on the how. And I'll use some case studies highlighting how digital twins are being used to build back better. This was echoed by Bill recently, so we know a lot about the what and the why, but not necessarily how to deal with it. A little bit about IES for those who don't know. We have over 25 years expertise in buildings analysis. We develop technology used by over 15,000 customers globally to design green and sustainable buildings and developments, tackling 75,000 plus projects per year, which I think is actually conservative, as is the 1 million buildings total. But on that basis, we've calculated a direct impact on carbon emissions equivalent to preventing around 37 power stations being built. So we had the climate emergency, which prompted a number of governments worldwide to affirm commitments to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Then the pandemic hit, which has highlighted other opportunities and threats. In response to that, the Build Back Better campaign was launched, with a response from government in their 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution last month. We've seen the EU Green Deal, which has been in place since the beginning of the year. The IWBI, or International Well Buildings Institute, launched their new health and safety rating aimed at providing a certification to reassure employees and customers or visitors that it's safe to return to buildings amid the aftermath of COVID and beyond. The UK government also mandated that by 2025 businesses will be required to disclose climate-related risk and mitigation. And sustainable investments, or those focused on companies with strong environmental, social and corporate governance, or ESG principles, outperformed their conventional counterparts in the first quarter of 2020, even as the pandemic sent markets crashing. So I think these together provide quite strong signals that the time is right to move towards a healthy, sustainable and equitable future. And at this point, I'd like to hand over to Anne.
Thanks, Sarah. So I am just going to show you my screen. Right, thanks very much for the introduction. So I'm just going to spend kind of 10-15 minutes talking a little bit about what is ESG and why does it matter. And then I'll hand back to Sarah where she'll then continue to discuss the role of technology and in particular digital twins in this world where there's an increasing emphasis on ESG disclosure and data. So first of all, what is ESG? It stands for environmental, social and governance, and essentially it's these are sort of three pillars of how businesses need to evolve and work in in order for us to have to meet targets like net zero and a more equitable world. So environmental is your impact on the world. So that's things like climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, waste and pollution, extraction from resources. Social is your contribution to your communities. So that's things like working conditions for staff, impact on local communities around where you do your business, your approach to health and safety, and also employee relations and diversity. And governance is basically how you conduct yourself. So things like executive pay, bribery and corruption, political lobbying, and board diversity and structure. ESG factors touch on every area of a business. And these are some examples of how those factors can be integrated into a business. So first of all, operations, looking at things like greenhouse gas emissions, setting a target for being a net zero carbon business in operation and developing plans for achieving that. That's particularly important now, given that there is legislation in place for net zero carbon economies, 2050 for the UK and 2045 for Scotland. Facilities and buildings, people really need to now look at committing to occupying only net zero carbon buildings by, say, 2040, given that there's a 2045 target for net zero carbon overall in Scotland. And waste, aiming to operate as a closed loop business. So this is circular economy principles, looking at where there is waste in your business and seeking to eliminate it. And that's not just waste in terms of products, it's also waste in terms of money and in terms of time, because a lot of the time these things, when they are implemented, actually do improve business processes. It's equally important to look beyond your own activities and into your supply chain. These are what are referred to as Scope 3 emissions, and both as a potentially a client, but also as a customer, you need to look at where you sit in a supply chain and whether you are going to be required by other people in that chain to provide ESG information. So you might want to look at setting policies and codes that align with accepted social and environmental standards. Most of these at the moment are voluntary. There's not an awful lot that is mandatory. Can include ESG criteria in procurement, improve supplier engagement by much more regular discussions with other people in your supply chain, and measure and disclose performance, which is particularly important across the board. Looking at products and services, can innovate to reduce material consumption and transition to more sustainable products and services. And this is where there is a significant opportunity around ESG. It's not all about risk. As Sarah has already pointed out, there's increasing evidence that companies that have strong ESG performances do better financially. I'll come on to some of the reasons for that in a little bit. Invest in R&D, develop products and make project management decisions that fully consider ESG impacts throughout their life cycle. And again, this is important in terms of thinking about how something that you produce, what its impacts might have when it's being used by your customer or at some other part in its life cycle, and accounting for that, and not just in the bit that you have direct control over. And designing products and services that minimise ESG impacts and serve as solutions to key sustainability challenges, and accelerating the transition towards a circular economy. It's important to think about things like this as right now, while they are voluntary, because there will be increasing legislative requirements to do this coming down the line. And then with employees, and this is particularly important because for a lot of businesses, the most significant area of cost that businesses have is in their headcount and in their staff. And for a lot of businesses, they've identified their commitment to ESG as being particularly important in being able to attract and retain talent. For a lot of people in millennials and Generation Z, if a company can't demonstrate that it lives or abides by the same values that they themselves do, then they are not going to want to work there. So companies are looking at things like building diverse and inclusive workforces and providing formal training, creating different employee support groups where there's demand, identifying people at senior levels who've got responsibility for implementing those things, developing and implementing formal training on key sustainability issues for all staff, providing coaching, mentoring and networks for sustainability knowledge sharing, not just within businesses but across sectors. Looking at things like company pension schemes. This is there's a campaign launched earlier this year called Make My Money Matter. The impact of, and they put out a stat that basically said that people moving their pension to a more sustainable fund has 37 times more impact than reducing flying and becoming vegan combined. So it really is important, and I think there's becoming an increasing interest, particularly from young people, of wanting to know where their money is going and where it is invested. And by the same token, looking at staff incentives and compensation to encourage behaviour change. Obviously this year we've had a massive change in culture foisted on us because of the pandemic, but looking at what elements of that work for people, what can we keep, what benefits the workforce. So things, is working from home for at least some of the time something that businesses should keep going forward, or supporting the creation of neighbourhood work hubs, allowing people to have that better work-life balance. So this slide is borrowed from Mike Barry, who was the man who implemented Marks and Spencer's Plan A. And the purpose of this is to show a critical mass towards ESG and sustainable practices becoming normal business practice. And it is quite interesting because this was he probably first showed this slide in about 2012 or 2015, around that time, when Marks and Spencers were launching Plan A. And I think it is safe to say that this is definitely what we're seeing now. So this kind of increasing number of businesses that are defining themselves as sustainable, and it is moving increasingly away from just corporate social responsibility towards encompassing all of these different operational aspects of a business, where things are being addressed systemically across the whole business and the whole supply chain. And this is Joseph Stiglitz, who is a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he said GDP, he's here talking about GDP, so what he's saying is it's not a good measure of economic performance, and it's not a good measure of well-being. And basically the reason for that is in the quote there: what we measure informs what we do, and if we measure the wrong thing, we're going to do the wrong thing. Some of you might also have heard of Kate Raworth and her Donut Economics, and I would really urge you to look up her TED Talk, or go on her Donut Economics Action Lab website, where there's lots of information about this. Essentially what Stiglitz and Raworth and other economists are saying is that treating environmental and social factors as externalities and not including them in calculations is bad business practice, because ultimately it fundamentally undermines the value of a business, and it causes a lot of the massive inequalities that we're seeing at the moment, and that is not sustainable. So for us to move away from that, we need to genuinely understand what the kind of social foundation of our society is and what the environmental ceiling is, and operate within that. So just to give some examples of why that's important at the moment, and a lot of these are recent, they've been in the press this week. So consumer spending, 66% of consumers are happy to pay more for environmentally friendly products, and that goes up to 72% for consumers under the age of 20. Those figures are from 2015, so I think it's probably safe to say that they're probably even higher now. But that can lead to pressure on businesses to improve performance and a temptation to veer into greenwashing. So it is really important to make sure that claims that are being made about sustainability and environmental performance can genuinely be backed up with data, and also that claims aren't exaggerated or overstated. Companies like Patagonia, which are well known for being environmentally responsible, are also equally open and honest and transparent about where they do use chemicals and where they are trying to improve. And that is better than just saying, well, we are the best, we are the first. People respond much better to genuine attempts to improve. So an example of that there with Shell this week, a number about, I think so far 4 or 5 senior executives in Shell's clean energy business have quit because they don't actually believe that the rest of the chief executive and the rest of the senior management are committed to transforming the business as quickly as they think it needs to transform. So this is, this story was from the Financial Times. It obviously reflects really badly on Shell, and is not the information that they would want to be out in the press when in a few weeks they are going to be announcing a strategy, their net zero carbon strategy. So where they were actually probably hoping for a focus on the kind of good news, now they're getting a lot of negative press around all these high profile departures. The other story about oil and gas, an American renewables company, NextEra, overtook ExxonMobil as the largest US energy company for a short period of time in October. So for around a week, it was the biggest energy company in the States. Exxon kind of eventually kind of leapfrogged it back. But the underlying story is that over the past 10 years, the market capitalisation of NextEra has grown 600%, and that of Exxon has halved. Coca-Cola, in 2018, they launched their World Without Waste campaign and were heralding the launch of their plant bottle, which was partly made from plant materials. But they have been named the top plastic polluter for the past 3 years. So again, lots of accusations, lots of NGOs and activist groups now targeting them and accusing them of greenwash, and Coca-Cola coming under a lot of pressure, in part because of the claims that they made in 2018 and the fact that they don't seem to be doing anything at all to improve their performance. And the last story that I just wanted to draw some attention to is the tragic story of Ella Kissi-Debrah, which you might have seen in the press. So she is a 9-year-old girl who died in 2013 of a severe asthma attack. And a second inquest is currently underway as to whether her death was caused by air pollution. And if that is the outcome of that inquest, she'll be the first person in the world to have air pollution officially recorded as a cause of death. And the ramifications of that could be huge, because poor air quality is responsible for up to 36,000 premature deaths in the UK, and that's according to a study by King's College University that was published in the summer. And that is more than double that was caused by passive smoking when the smoking ban was introduced in 2010. So the UK government has been taken to court several times by the EU over a failure to meet air quality targets. And if this inquest does find that it was a factor in Ella's death, then I think we could see some quite significant changes that would affect all of us in terms of governments trying to control the levels of air pollution, particularly in our cities. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and hand back to Sarah.
Thanks, Anne. A lot to take on board there. Thanks very much for that. That was really enlightening, I thought. So I think the point there really is to just pick up that development of this vision of a green, sustainable and equitable future involves everybody. It's not just about designers and developers, we're all stakeholders. And we feel that having the right tools to unlock the vast amount of data that's already available, not just in buildings, but local authorities, there's public data floating around everywhere. If we can access that data, which we can typically, and we can actually make use of it and put it in the hands of us, the stakeholders, to help us to make the right choices, then I think that's quite important. I think it's recognised that sort of decarbonisation and GDP go hand in hand, but there are other areas that we need to be able to consider when we're creating those net zero pathways or roadmaps, whatever you want to call them. Common themes coming through in a lot of the initiatives that we spoke about, things like job creation, sustainable transport, home working, good quality housing, air quality, access to food, healthcare, education for all, an equitable future. So the rise of the digital twin. The Centre for Digital Built Britain states that digital twins enable better use, operation, maintenance, planning and delivery of assets, systems and services. So we're going beyond design and we're going beyond tackling individual buildings, new build. It's very much a focus on scaling up and looking at the entire life cycle of assets, not just individual buildings. In the 18 months since we launched our digital twin capability, we've seen digital twins explode in construction in all shapes and sizes. We've been working a lot with local authorities, universities and private clients to develop digital twins, primarily looking at energy and sustainability. And often the conversation has expanded out to the more socioeconomic metrics in line with those previously mentioned. So the Intelligent Communities Life Cycle, or ICL technology, encompasses 4 key areas to support a very flexible digital twin solution. Design and retrofit, which is what we're most known for, developing tools to assist with green and sustainable design. Sustainable master planning and urban design enables us to scale up, so from individual buildings, as I said, to cities, countries, continents, which in turn accelerates this transition to a low carbon economy. If we can tackle this at scale, it's going to happen quicker. We're going to achieve those net zero targets quicker. The optimal asset operation is an analytics platform within the digital twin that facilitates connection between the real assets and the virtual, using meters and sensors typically. But very much a focus then on, as I say, operational performance throughout the asset lifecycle. Community energy and renewables is focused on network design and optimization, and the case studies will highlight the application of these tools in different scenarios. We developed a specification which encompasses the capabilities of our digital twin technology. The document is available to download from the website. The specification is aimed at helping those procuring digital twins to define their needs very clearly, because that term means a lot of different things to different people. And it also helps those delivering digital twins to define their offering, their response to that procurement need. So we start the digital twin at any level. We can look at individual buildings, we can look at networks in their own right, but then we can also look at the combination of the two, so campuses, portfolios of buildings, distributed geographically, districts, cities. And we start the digital twin process at any point in the asset life cycle. So mostly we are dealing with existing assets, but the approach for new developments is very similar. And often you get a combination of the two. You've got a new development within an existing site. Okay, so how do we build a digital twin? Here we have a 2D portfolio model of existing fire stations across Glasgow. Another example might be a portfolio distributed across countries. One of the case studies that is the case. All of the buildings in these distributed sort of portfolio information models are represented by a pin, as you can see on the map. We then start to manually input data. For example, just even the building name, postcode, the age of the building, energy bills if they're available. You know, it could be EPC, energy performance certificates for each building, or whether there's a car share scheme in operation. Whatever the client is interested in monitoring and improving. They can then filter by that information. So if they wanted to create a portfolio level decarbonisation roadmap, they can identify which buildings to target first, maybe the worst performing. And then they can track progress as they implement that roadmap, and they can communicate that progress to stakeholders. The digital twins are web-based, cloud-based, interactive. So, you know, by having the right login details, the right permissions, anybody can go in and look at that information. And that's quite an important part, because otherwise this information and the ESG information that Anne was talking about will mostly be, you know, in reports that are produced and then maybe read by a handful of people in the organisation. But to really get that stakeholder engagement, I think it's important to be able to share, communicate, get buy-in to everybody that's involved in achieving those targets. So where we have a portfolio level digital twin where the buildings are co-located, so in the previous example they were geographically sort of spread out. In this example, they're buildings all together. It's actually Glasgow University campus. We create a 3D model of that. So we've got a 3D representation, very simple visualization of, for example, buildings by type, or again, maybe looking at, you know, the energy use intensity. So which buildings are more heavy consumers of energy. We overlay metered data from the buildings and the network in this model. And then we can start to look at interventions, for example, PV siting on roofs. I'm really just going through the process here of how we actually create these. The case studies will sort of explain more about, you know, how they're then utilised. Another sort of visual representation, in this case for Glasgow Uni, is the sort of network side of things. So we're looking at two halves of the campus, each served by a separate substation. This can be used just for planning and understanding, you know, how the network is actually set up. If we want to go in to the network design itself and start to optimize that, so looking at different low and zero carbon technologies, interventions in the network, we use the network design and optimization capability within the digital twin. We can also simulate demand where there's no metered data available, so we have a very comprehensive picture, you know, using the data that is available and supplementing that with simulated data for all of the buildings in the site. So again, if it's an existing site and there's a new building going in, you know, we can fill in that gap. So from the 2D or 3D model, we can then identify individual buildings that already have a more detailed model available. And these have the potential to become digital twins in their own right. At the building level, we create a detailed model of whatever elements we want to connect to the metered data. So typically at the building level, we're looking at the building systems. If we want to investigate improvements in systems operation, we can automate connection to the live data. We use machine learning to cleanse, sort, and fill in any gaps as the data comes in. So that reduces the time that it takes to actually set these models up. And effectively, we can shine a light on what is actually going on under the hood in terms of the systems, and that allows us to then optimize performance. So the first case study I wanted to touch on is quite a good example of that, actually, at the building level. And in relation to Build Back Better as well, I'll draw it back to that conversation. So this is a collaboration that we're extremely proud of, focused on the Education Skills Funding Agency School Building Framework. And it won the CIBSE Building Performance Award this year for Best Collaboration. IES partnered with Bowman and Kirkland and integrated BMS to deliver the mission of closing the performance gap on the route to net zero. The ESFA guidelines require contractors to report on energy and water use, and more granular data than monthly meter readings was necessary to provide insight into operational performance. So you can see the diagram at the bottom there shown in quite a bit of detail where the energy is going in the building. But once created, this provides a very valuable digital asset. So it's a calibrated digital twin of the schools, which can now be used to monitor air quality post-pandemic in all areas in real time to reassure staff and pupils that the environment is safe and healthy. So you can have a visual representation in the school or in individual rooms if you wanted to show that, you know, the air quality is as it should be. Universities, as I said, we've done quite a lot of work with universities around the world. They are towns in their own right, so present a great opportunity to look at the wider aspects of digital twins in the context of building back better, so green, healthy, sustainable, you know, microcosms, if you like, so a smaller example of cities and larger scale developments. This is a pilot project with Heriot-Watt University, so it's a work in progress. Currently, there are 3 buildings on this digital twin dashboard. There are 5 campuses in total, and in time, all of the buildings will be connected to this digital twin. So it's aggregating operational data at the portfolio campus building and intervention level, and examples of the interventions that have been implemented already are improved fabric, photovoltaic cells, air source heat pumps, and they can then monitor progress against their decarbonisation goals, and they can actually monitor the ROI or return on investment of those individual interventions as well, and how that then impacts the sort of portfolio-wide decarbonisation goals. Again, when we have this detailed information, we have the models in there, we have the metered data coming in real time, we can start to expand that out from energy to look again at air quality and indoor spaces. So maybe developing a more tailored solution post-COVID, rather than just saying, right, okay, we need to supply full fresh air across all the buildings, which has a massive impact on capital cost, operating cost, as well as carbon. They can be very focused because we can use the CO2 data that's coming from the buildings themselves to monitor where there may be issues with air quality, and then they can address that. At the campus level, we're also looking at things like sustainable transport, walkability, cycle routes, space utilisation as well, where we're capturing the CO2 data. We can actually look at which parts of the campus are more intensely utilised than others. And in some cases in buildings, it's just maybe a case of freeing up some internal space. So, for example, you might have meeting rooms that are, you know, sized for 6 or 8 or 10 people that are hardly ever used, or maybe used by 1 or 2 people. So it may be more beneficial to, you know, change that to be a more flexible sort of collaborative working space with smaller meeting spaces within it. So there's lots of different things that you can start to capture, visualize, communicate, and that again is the power of the digital twin. Okay. This one has been in the press quite a lot, so I'm not going to really talk about it in too much detail. This is a Limerick Lighthouse project for the Positive Cities Exchange, working with various partners on this with the aim of creating clusters of buildings that are termed positive energy blocks, which means that they produce more energy than they consume. And the aim of this Positive Cities Exchange project is to have 100 of these PEBs across Europe by 2025. Another great opportunity to look beyond energy at sustainable transport, network and building interventions, as well as social development. So things like demographics for urban planning. Is it an ageing population, or is it younger families that are moving in? Do we need more schools or retirement homes? In this case, there was also the aspiration to set up an energy trading scheme, peer-to-peer. So we were developing tools to help the community to manage that energy scheme, make decisions regarding their own energy consumption. Maybe it's as Anne was referring to earlier, more home working. What are the requirements for that? See how the renewables on the site and the associated battery storage are actually working in real time. Incentivising the stakeholders to maybe use their appliances when the PV cells are charging, for example. But again, having that information on their own devices, on their mobile phones or at home, can help to inform them to make the right choices. And also to then for the sort of community itself and the local council to communicate the sort of benefits and the principles that are being implemented there as an example, and that's why it's a lighthouse project, an exemplar. So the last case study is a little bit more esoteric, but I wanted to include it because I think it highlights, it's taking a step back and looking more at the socioeconomic factors alongside energy. So this is a vacant site, also in Limerick, which has been lying derelict for 4 years. We created a simple dashboard for investors, which shows 4 scenarios for development of the site, projecting forward to 2050. So the plan was to create a mixed-use development comprising, apartments with retail. In doing so, the carbon emissions would increase. They're currently at 0 because it's a vacant derelict site. So that has implications on the City Council's decarbonisation plans. But we were able to factor into the dashboard other things like job creation, crime, overall value of the site, the impact of electric vehicles on local air quality, as well as disposable income for the residents and the site owner. So all of these positive impacts could be weighed against the increase in carbon. So the investors themselves can see the benefits of making the development lower zero carbon because it does generate more money for them and it increases the overall value of the site, and it also creates more disposable income for the residents, which makes it more attractive for people coming in. And then the conversation with the planners is able to be framed around the jobs increases involved in building the development in the first place, installing the renewables, maintaining those sort of systems, as well as the retail elements, bringing jobs into the area. And if we make it, net zero, if we develop the site as well, crime decreases. There are other benefits alongside that. So we can measure a lot of this is a relationship model that's been built using data from the Central Statistics Office. So their own information used to inform this, discussions with the local authority, about what their sort of factors are that they would consider most important, most valuable for the site. Okay, so in summary, the technology is ready and being used in real world projects now. The ICL enables us to work at scale. As I said, that speeds up the transition to the low carbon economy that we so desire. And we can look across time as well. So we're not just looking at, the 12 months that we might simulate a building for. Typically, we can look forward, we can factor in future climate scenarios, 2030, 2040, 2050, to see where a campus or a city might be in their net zero carbon journey at that point. We can test and implement and manage all of these different sort of outcomes, if you like, alongside the net zero carbon. So job creation, better local sort of environments, areas, health and well-being, all that sort of thing can be included in there and communicated from there. Okay, I think that's what I was going to finish on. I'll just leave this message up and I will switch the cameras back on, I think, and see if we've got any questions. We've got 10-15 minutes now to answer questions for Anne or myself. Yeah, I don't actually see anything. Nothing's come through. So that's an early
Can I
finish
ask you
then.
a question, Sarah?
Of course. Yeah, of course. Go for it.
So, I mean, I think it's really interesting about the use of space, and I mean, there were things that were affecting how we use commercial space even before the pandemic, like the switch from physical to online retail. So, and a lot of people are obviously looking at trying to make the experience of actually working from home more collaborative. So what, how could digital twins kind of help with that? Like, the kind of repurposing of empty space and actually helping towards, contributing towards aspirations like things like 20-minute cities?
Good question. One I haven't really considered. I mean, yeah, once you've got that model there, you can basically do whatever you want to with it. So you create, or we would create scenarios with the owners and maybe the local authorities and any other stakeholders. So, you were talking about a community scheme that you're involved with at the moment. So we would try
Yeah.
and utilise the model as the kind of central focus for what people want to actually put in there. What do they know? What is their aspiration? What's important to them, KPIs or however they want to measure success from it. And then we can run different scenarios on it. So we could say, I don't know, different ways that you could occupy that space would have this impact on transport in the area. Obviously, I mean, energy is an obvious one. I'm not going to keep on talking about that, but and then it's building in the value, to the local community, the stakeholders. How do you, that these are the softer issues that were really, because the energy, water, waste, carbon is quite easy to measure. I think we're all pretty au fait with that now, but it's a lot of these softer measures that you were talking about that are more difficult. And it is soft, so the data's soft as well. So it does really need that sort of co-creation approach to it. We don't have all the answers. We can access some of the data, but there'll be data that's locked away in different systems within the local authority that could be utilised that actually probably isn't being utilised. And yeah, there's leveraging all of that. The digital twin enables you to leverage that.
I think that's an important part about where it sits in the wider ESG kind of ecosystem as well, is identifying, looking at who your stakeholders are, looking at who stakeholders are in a particular site or in a particular business, and then engaging with them, because that will change the sort of balance of, I think the Limerick example is a really good one for that, because Scotland's got a legacy of vacant and derelict land. There's 11,000 hectares that are on the vacant and derelict land register, and that's probably just the tip of it. There'll be plenty of other sites that are not formally recorded, and in a lot of those cases it's just that the investment case hasn't been made because the right information isn't being pulled into that case.
Yeah, I think you were talking as well about the being able to frame that discussion with the local authority, the planners, and then saying so that they can have their input. So if you were having to, as you say, spend £500,000 a year in cleaning up that site after it's just been, whatever, vandalised or wrecked because it's lying empty, then that comes into the discussion as well. So it's incentives, isn't it? But it's being able to sort of put all of that information together to make it a viable proposition. I mean, the other thing that we see an increase of, which I haven't really talked about, but the positive energy block example does kind of encapsulate it, is this move towards more locally owned and run, managed community energy schemes. And whilst it's badged as a community energy scheme, there are obviously those kind of wealth creation opportunities for the residents, the ownership, empowerment. They're in control of how they utilise their energy and, what decisions they make about how they might change their own behaviours and their carbon footprint as a result. So that's, again, relies on something like, a robust platform, I would say, a digital twin, to be able to capture all of those interdependencies as well, and trying to manage that. More home working, changes the travel patterns, using electric vehicles to actually charge and discharge, move energy around the grid, because that's a big sort of conundrum for the energy providers at the moment, is that the network is legacy.
Mhm.
And we have one example in the Orkneys actually where they placed very stringent constraints on how much electricity could actually be imported to the grid from there's large wind turbines in Orkney, because the grid can't really take it. And then when you start plugging in individual PV installations for houses, and you've got your EV as well, all that disrupts the harmonics, and it costs money to then keep it all going. So looking at alternative ways to distribute energy around that network is another factor that plays in. And again, that's about behaviours, isn't it? It's about giving people the right sort of information to say, well, this is how you're going to benefit yourself and your local area. And the air quality thing, I mean, that is a massive issue. And if they're starting to quantify that a bit better, and show how we can improve it, even in a sort of localised scale, that's got to
in
be a
terms of, I
positive.
mean, one thing I didn't mention when I talked about that, but in terms of cost, it's been estimated that in England alone, the public health cost of poor air quality between now and 2035 will be over £5 billion.
Right.
And obviously when you start looking at that and you think about the fact that that it was because of public health impacts on public health that the smoking ban came in the first place. So I think it's inevitable that we're going to see legislation that will, that comes back to the question of who is the polluter, because in that particular case it's traffic, so it's not just, it's not like a big business, a big corporate, it's not a local authority or the government. There is a degree of responsibility on each and every individual that chooses to get in a car and make a journey and drive.
Sure.
So we already know that diesels are being phased out, and the date for that was being brought forward. Combustion engines generally, that was brought forward in the 10-point plan. So these are kind of examples of why I think there already is an increasing demand for data, and it will only keep going that way, because people, we will all need to know as individuals and as businesses where what our impact is in a much more granular way than we've done in the past.
Having something flagging up saying to you, well, if you avoid this journey today, you'll save whatever kilograms carbon, and that'll mean something. But I mean, I think the important thing as well is for us, when we start looking at this, is not to look at things in a siloed way. It needs to all be connected. I mean, obviously Centre for Digital Built Britain's pushing for a national digital twin, which would basically be a federation of digital twins for different developments that would, have transport feeding into them, and trying to pull all that together. I mean, I think it sounds like a great thing to do in theory. How easy or difficult it will be to connect everything, I don't know. But that it does need to be, all of the projects that we've been talking about are looking at things holistically, which I think is really important as well, and projecting forward. So it's not just today, it's what's happening with that if you go down this route in 10 years' time, 20 years' time. So that's the power of it from our point of view. Okay, I don't see, oh, here we go. Do you have an example where digital twin has led to a tangible reduction in energy or CO2? Yes, yes, we do have lots of examples of that. I would urge people to look at the case studies. They can contact myself if you have specific questions. What difficulties do we have in collecting data? It can be challenging. And again, it depends on the relationship. So, if we're going to an end client, so for example, a local authority in Scotland, we were doing 30 schools for them, digital twin, very much focused on FM day to day, how effective the systems are all running across all of those buildings. So having that contact who can access the information for us makes it a lot easier. In a lot of cases, you are involving the BMS company as well to unlock that data at the buildings level. When it comes to more that sort of city district level, I mean, obviously it's different kinds of data, and some of it is publicly available. As I say, you can get access to it now. Some of it is contained within their own systems, but as long as you've got that sort of buy-in, that loop of communication saying, right, you need to provide this in this way to make this work, and these are the benefits to you. So yeah, I mean, it can be challenging, but I think we are moving forward generally. I mean, obviously in buildings you've got the IoT sensors coming in. We've got LoRaWAN type of examples of that, where it can collect so much data without it having to be unlocked or somebody logging in and manually extracting that information and then sending it off. We have lots of ways where we can automate data collection, but it does require agreement, a data requisition framework, as we would call it. Would you mind running through how socioeconomic improvements benefits are projected? Okay, so in that case, with the last case study, we, as I say, we used the Centre for Central Statistics Office to capture information about the number of people in that particular zone of the city, the number of people that were in employment, the average salaries, crime rates, that kind of information was on there already. And then with the local council, we would say, okay, so looking at historical data to get a trend, if you like, in crime rates around vacant plots in that city. So it's just kind of getting whatever information's available and then collaborating with the various parties to build a model that represents a fairly realistic, a true representation of how they see things. I mean, with climate and that, obviously that's easy. We have access to future climate files, but the socioeconomic stuff is relying on the information that they have and some sensible assumptions, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's also fair to say, Sarah, that a lot of that, by its nature, has to be qualitative. So like things like crime rates, obviously you can get some data for, but in terms of, what's the benefit of maybe, like if you had the choice between putting a building on a vacant site or turning it into an urban forest, to some degree you can only really estimate what that means to a community qualitatively.
Yeah. With the softer issues, absolutely, yeah. And that's where it comes back to, whoever's making the decisions about what it is that they see, what's the value to them. How much does it cost? I would say please drop me an email and I'll send on some cost. What's the best form for a building passport? Is that one you can answer, Anne? A building passport? Don't know.
I don't know. I don't really know, to be honest.
No. Challenges for first-time digital twin adopters. Oh, keep it simple. Don't try and do everything in the first attempt. We usually start with a couple of buildings in the campus examples. If it is a larger scheme like Limerick, for example, we would start at the kind of high level, not detailed models of every single building, but looking at, which buildings do they want to deal with first. So they would pick a phase one, right, we're going to look at 20 buildings or 50 buildings and we're going to try these different interventions, and then we'll from there kind of build on it. So definitely keep it simple. Do you know if there'll be any incentives for developers apart from government to build PEBs? Apart from the obvious carbon benefit. I think there'll be demand, so it's usually market driven, isn't it? That's why even like so we design for performance now coming into play in the UK, you know, it's market driven because there's potential for more higher rental, in the case of domestic dwellings, higher sales prices, and about attracting and retaining the tenants in the office buildings, for example, but also then, you know, attracting people to a particular area of the town that's been redeveloped. So I think it'll be financial and it'll be market driven, personally. I was wondering if you guys had come across any digital twin examples in relation to urban heat or urban heat islands. Yes, we have, Madeline. We have worked on a couple of urban heat island projects in the Middle East, which I can provide further details on if you drop me a line. What software do you use in creating the 3D model? Yeah, we can import 3D models from anything really. Rhino, SketchUp. We use OpenStreetMap actually, that's what we typically use. And although there isn't necessarily height data, we can just, you know, on a large scale, we can put in heights of individual buildings, or we can just say, you know, they're all 3-story or whatever. So we use OpenStreetMap as the kind of main source because that's map data effectively. If it's a new development that doesn't exist, then obviously we're using things like SketchUp and Rhino. How do you see some of these factors being introduced through building regs, EPCs or other targets for planning? Oh, yeah. I'm hoping that with the SIBS TM60 series in Design for Performance and, you know, BREEAM and LEED in operation, that we're kind of moving away from. I mean, EPCs are great. You need them to benchmark new buildings against one another so you can see, you know, how they perform, but they're not a true picture, and that's a big factor. And that's with the schools example that I gave. They're looking to try and close the performance gap before they embark on a net zero journey. So get that aspect of design better, so challenging design assumptions, and not relying on a notional building operation, but really pulling in real data where they can to use that to advise the design process. So yeah, there's more emphasis on operational energy or operational performance of buildings and assets now, and I think net zero is driving that. So that's where it's coming from. How it will play out in building regulations, planning, definitely. I think new buildings in Scotland from this year on have to demonstrate how they would achieve net zero to get planning.
Yeah, and I think there will be a change around 2024 in terms of heat. So there's like a lot of work going on at the moment about decarbonising heat, and it's just about getting that to a point where, but that will definitely then will come through planning.
Yeah.
So there'll be changes in the planning regime definitely, and therefore by extension, I think through building regulations as well.
Yeah. Okay, Jazz. Right, so what degree are you integrating GIS and BIM as part of your work between building scale and regional scale digital twins, and what has been your experience? So GIS, we can use GIS data to create those large scale models. BIM is, I would say, a contributing factor. Obviously, a lot of buildings are available as a sort of BIM level 2 model, which inherently has a lot of data in there, structured information, which is really useful in moving towards a digital twin. If the models are good quality, then we can reuse those in our tools. But it does depend, and I mean, at the moment, we're not sort of linking back to the BIM model in terms of the live data that exists within our analytics platform, but I can see that being something that if we are moving towards a more sort of national digital twin framework, that'll be something that will come through, whereby live data can be linked back to the sort of static BIM model. So when you develop digital twins, do you simultaneously integrate smart systems to manage building systems, or is it more of a study to figure out solutions later? Yeah, it depends really, but on what you want to do. So if you're at the building level and you want to optimize the building systems that exist, then we connect to that building data and we analyze it in the analytics platform. And a lot of that is automated, as I say, the import of the data and even the analysis. So the platform itself will identify trends in the data, and it will identify where metered values go out with of a certain acceptable threshold, and it will flag that up so that can, let the maintenance team know that there's an issue or there's something, going wrong before it actually goes wrong in this particular system or part of the building. So we can do it live, we can do a lot of it live, and we can also use it to plan, because you might, you've got, money to invest to reduce your carbon. Where is the best place to invest that money within your building or your collection of buildings and the systems and the networks to get the best return? So it's both things really. Live monitoring, continuous commissioning as we would call it, and also being able to plan forward and predict the impacts of changes, interventions that you want to make. Apart from published CIBSE benchmarks, are there live public data listing main consumption of buildings? There's a few benchmarking sort of initiatives. Carbon Buzz is one that springs to mind. I think we'll see more of that. I know that BRE were moving to, or maybe have already moved to having this as part of the submission going forward. So they were looking at operational energy consumption as part of the sort of submission, so that they could then develop a database of sustainability sort of metrics, I guess, or buildings that are sort of demonstrating these metrics ranked, something like that. But there are benchmarks. Again, if you want to just drop me an email, I can provide a more comprehensive list of those. Does the software allow for input of building fabric thermal properties? Yes. Don McLean, the digital twin will ultimately control the building and community. Yeah, so that's where we're moving towards. So we can use the digital twin to not control the building and the community, but to manage, I would say, is probably a better word. So in real time, the digital twin will simulate based on historical data and future weather predictions, for example, and then it will tweak the controls within the building, a bit like the Hive controls do at the moment on a domestic scale. So it's a self-learning sort of algorithm that tweaks the programming of the boiler, for example, based on the occupant behaviours. So if you consistently come home late on a Thursday, it will push the heating back to come on an hour later or something like that to tie in. Okay, how does data uptake and verification work for different types of sources? Is there a minimum amount of real-time information you need for reasonably useful DT? Do you have methods for adding soft data types to the model? Yeah, absolutely we do. Minimum amount of real-time information depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, we can go down to 1 minute time steps if we want to, or even below that. But the question would be, for that amount of data, what added insight do you actually get? It very much depends what you're trying to do. Usually I would say it's like 15-minute time steps for the real-time data. But we can go below that. It's just a lot of data, that's all. And the soft data types, yeah, I mean, that's pretty manual at the moment, unless the hard data is meters, sensors, BMS, anything like that. The soft data types is more things like occupant feedback. So you could maybe develop like a little sub app that they have on their phones that say, yeah, the space is comfortable or it's too hot, or, you know, or whatever feedback it is that you're interested in capturing from them. Right, post-pandemic world, how does the DT adjust to a more distributed workplace and working patterns? Well, the digital twin is a reflection of what's happening in reality. So anything that you want to monitor, test, improve, predict, you know, you put that in there and you would set it up to do just that. So yeah, I mean, home working is that's a really good example because it does have implications on heating your homes or a room in your home versus heating a whole office building, the travelling to and from, you know, quality of home life, which is different at different stages in a person's life as well. So some people want to get out and have the social aspect, other people are happy to work from home and then do their socialising after that. Very insightful. Right, okay. Is there an industry which is not currently utilising digital twin that you think would really benefit from it? Well, I don't feel qualified to answer that question, Anne.
I mean, I think, you know, we've probably kind of come at this from the perception of a lot of it being to do with real estate and businesses that have, you know, a lot of assets. But with the, you know, again, going back to the home working question, you know, there might be other types of businesses, like, I don't know, a big insurance firm or something like that, that only has one building or did only have one building, but now has 10,000 people that are all working in 10,000 different places. So, you know, it might well be that the kind of, and it's interesting, Sarah, the point you made about a national digital twin, and you know, the concept of it moving away from really being something that helps you manage energy and carbon to managing a whole gamut of ESG factors. I think that would then mean there's probably plenty of industries that wouldn't even have considered it that would benefit from using the technology.
Yeah, so that mandate, I mean 2025, but they're starting now, aren't they? Or is it next year with the bigger banks and is it
Yeah, for the
insurance firms or?
TCFD
Yes,
disclosures, yeah. And also, as well as the TCFD mandatory disclosures that the UK government is bringing in 2025, the EU is bringing the sustainable finance disclosure regulations will come into force in March 2021. So
right.
there are regulations around non-financial disclosures that are imminent.
And will those organisations go out to the market? Will they enlist consultants or through their portfolio manager or property manager partners, will they enlist consultants to deliver that
Yeah,
information?
that's kind of what I was saying about, you know, thinking even if you think it doesn't affect you, it probably will, because you might have somebody like your landlord or, you know, somebody else coming and saying, we need this information from you. We've never asked for it before, but we need to disclose it now, and now we need it from you.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting, really is. I mean, it's fascinating to me because it does just tie everything to, I mean, we've talked about sustainability for 20 odd years easily, and progress has been made. I'm not saying that it hasn't, but now there seems to be more urgency around making those things known, being able to actually communicate it and express it, measure it.
Yeah.
You know, I know Ernst and Young has a framework as well. They're looking at things like inclusive capital, which relates back to what you were talking about, is, you know, involving everybody or considering at least everybody, the
Mm-hmm.
local community, your employees, you know, what are the impacts of the decisions that you make on those sort
Yeah,
of.
I mean, Scotland has a Just Transition Commission, so they're looking at this in terms of not just, you know, the fact that in this transition to a net zero economy, that it is also a just transition, and that
Right.
people don't get, you know, there aren't groups of society that end up getting excluded and left behind in the way that has
Yeah.
happened before. So, for example, you know, obviously the collapse of the coal industry in the early 80s, although that's, phasing out of coal-fired power stations is really important in terms of carbon. But what happens to all those people, and like when you remove jobs from a community, what do you replace it with? So there is there's particularly in Scotland and in places like New Zealand, there's a big emphasis on that, but that will be important on the investment side as well.
Yeah, and I think the 10-point plan does. That's kind of heavily discussed in there as well. Okay, so yeah, I'm aware that we're at 11:10. Do we want to? There's quite a few more questions.
Yeah,
to go.
I think if there's other questions that we've not covered, we can pick them up. I'm happy to kind of answer any that might be for me, but they're probably all for you, Sarah.
Well, it's a crossover, isn't it? I think I'll close it out just now, and I can pick those questions up. I'm trying to just look through and see if there's anything that's a bit different. One is environmental-based climate change projections. Okay, we will respond to the rest of the questions that we haven't picked up today via email. We can go out actually to everybody that's on the call with the question and the response to it after the session. But for now, I would really like to say a very big thank you to Anne. I think that was great. I'm feeling extremely positive about where we're going. And thank everybody that's joined us today as well. Thanks for turning out, and I hope it was useful and interesting. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Sarah.